Can you imagine? She walked into the most important job interview of her life with mud on her blazer and the weight of generations on her shoulders, knowing that in a room full of people who looked nothing like her, one mistake would confirm every stereotype they already believed about her. To them, it must be clueless to believe that a black woman from East Cleveland could make it in their world. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through the pre-dawn silence at 4:30 a.m. Maya Johnson rolled out of the narrow bed she shared with her younger sister Zoe, careful not to wake her. Their small apartment in East Cleveland felt even smaller in the darkness, cramped with second-hand furniture and the dreams of a family determined to rise above their circumstances, and the system designed to keep them down. Maya tiptoed to the kitchen where her mother, Grace, was already preparing for her double shift at the hospital. Grace worked as a certified nursing assistant during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, her hands perpetually dry from sanitizer and cleaning chemicals. She had stories, painful stories, about the way some patients treated her, the way supervisors questioned her competence despite her years of experience, the way she had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. "Morning, baby," Grace whispered, pressing a thermos of coffee into Maya's hands. "You sure about this interview today? That downtown office. It's their world, not ours. They might smile at you, but baby, some of them still see us as threats." Maya nodded, smoothing down the blazer they'd found at Goodwill last week. It was navy blue, slightly too big, but professional enough for her first real job interview since graduating from Cleveland State University with a business degree. The student loans felt like a mountain on her shoulders, made heavier by the knowledge that she'd had to borrow more than her white classmates because her family couldn't contribute as much. "I've been preparing for weeks, Mama. I know the statistics. I'll have to be twice as good to get half as far. But I'm ready." Grace's eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear, the same look Maya had seen on her grandmother's face when Grace first integrated her nursing program in the 1980s. "I know you can do it, sweetheart. Just remember, they might try to make you feel small, but you belong anywhere your mind and heart can take you. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Maya's father, Robert, emerged from the bedroom in his Postal Service uniform. Despite working at the post office for 15 years, he still took night classes at the community college, determined to get his bachelor's degree. The other students sometimes stared when he walked into classrooms where he was often the only black face, but he persisted. "My brilliant daughter," he said, wrapping her in a bear hug. "Show them what a Johnson can do. And if they try to tear you down because of who you are, you remember that you're standing on the shoulders of ancestors who survived much worse." The family had scraped together enough for Maya's education, often going without so she could focus on her studies. They knew the game was rigged, but they also knew that education was still one of the few weapons they had against systemic barriers. Maya caught the first bus of the morning, her resume printed on the highest quality paper she could afford, protected in a clear portfolio folder. As the bus wound through neighborhoods that gradually transformed from worn-down storefronts to gleaming office towers, she noticed how the demographics changed too. Fewer black faces, more suspicious stares when she made eye contact with other passengers. A middle-aged white woman clutched her purse tighter when Maya sat near her. Despite Maya's professional attire and obvious preparations for a business meeting, the small act of prejudice stung, but Maya had learned to expect such microaggressions. She focused on her phone, reviewing her notes and trying to center herself for what lay ahead. She dressed carefully in her best outfit. The navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, black slacks she'd hemmed herself, and comfortable black flats. Everything was chosen not just to look professional, but to counter stereotypes, conservative enough to avoid being labeled aggressive, feminine enough to avoid being seen as threatening, modest enough to avoid unwanted attention. As the bus approached downtown, Maya's phone buzzed with encouraging texts from her study group friends from college. Most of her white classmates had landed jobs through family connections or internships at companies where their parents worked. Maya had applied to dozens of positions, receiving few callbacks and fewer interviews. She'd learned to decode rejection letters, recognizing the polite language that really meant, "We're not ready for someone like you." Morrison and Associates had been a long shot. They rarely hired directly from regional universities, and their website showed a sea of white faces in their leadership photos. But her professors had encouraged her to apply anyway. "You have to try," Professor Martinez had said, one of the few Latino faculty members who understood the additional barriers Maya faced. "The worst they can do is say no, and you're already used to that." Maya stepped off the bus 6 blocks from the Morrison building, planning to arrive 15 minutes early. The October morning was crisp, and a light drizzle had started. She opened her small umbrella and began walking, acutely aware of the stares from other pedestrians, professional-looking people who seemed surprised to see a young black woman heading toward the business district. Halfway to her destination, she heard a commotion ahead. An elderly white woman had fallen on the wet sidewalk near a construction zone. Her groceries scattered around her. Several people walked past, phones to their ears, eyes averted. The woman, who appeared to be in her 70s, was struggling to get up, her face contorted in pain. Maya didn't hesitate, even knowing the risk. She'd heard stories of Good Samaritans being accused of causing accidents they were trying to help with, especially when race was involved. But she couldn't walk past someone in need. "Ma'am, please don't try to move yet," Maya said gently, kneeling beside the woman. "Are you hurt? Did you hit your head?" The woman, Mrs. Catherine Sullivan, looked up with initial surprise that quickly melted into grateful tears. "My ankle. I think I twisted it. These construction barriers. I couldn't see the uneven pavement." Maya carefully helped Mrs. Sullivan to a sitting position against a nearby wall, then began gathering the scattered groceries. She called 911 to report the fall and stayed with Mrs. Sullivan until the paramedics arrived, holding her hand and keeping her calm. "You're an angel," Mrs. Sullivan whispered. "Most people just walked right by. I'm ashamed to say I might have expected. Well, I might have had different expectations if I'd seen you coming. But you've shown me something beautiful today." The admission was both painful and healing. Maya squeezed the older woman's hand. "We're all just people trying to get through the day, Mrs. Sullivan. We need to take care of each other." By the time Maya left the scene, she was running late. Worse, her blazer was spotted with mud from kneeling on the wet pavement, and her carefully styled hair had begun to frizz in the humidity. She knew how this would look to the interview panel. Unprofessional, unreliable, fitting their preconceptions about those people who couldn't manage their lives properly. Standing outside the Morrison and Associates building, Maya faced a choice that felt loaded with racial implications. She could reschedule the interview, go home, clean up, and try again another day. But would they give her another chance, or would they see it as confirmation that she wasn't serious? Or she could go in as she was, professional but clearly having experienced some kind of mishap, and risk having her appearance overshadow her qualifications. She thought about all the black professionals who had come before her, who had endured far worse humiliations to open doors. She thought about her parents' sacrifices, about the weight of representation she carried not just for her family, but for her community. Maya straightened her shoulders and walked into the gleaming lobby, ready for battle. The reception area was intimidating. All marble floors, contemporary art, and the subtle hum of success. Well-dressed white people moved purposefully through the space, their shoes clicking confidently on the polished stone. Maya approached the reception desk, acutely aware that she was the only black person visible in the entire lobby. "I'm Maya Johnson," she said to the receptionist, a polished blonde woman whose smile faltered slightly when she looked up. I have a 9:30 interview with the executive team. The receptionist's eyes swept over Maya's appearance. The mud stains, the slightly disheveled hair. The clear signs of someone who didn't belong in this pristine environment. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed disdain. "Oh, Maya Johnson. Yes, just a moment." She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones that Maya couldn't quite make out, but whose tone suggested surprise, possibly concern. Maya waited in the pristine lobby, surrounded by other candidates who had arrived for what she now realized was a group interview process. There were 5 others, all white, all impeccably dressed, all carrying leather portfolios, all looking like they had been born to occupy spaces like this. She recognized some faces from networking events and job fairs. There was Brad Mitchell, whose father owned a successful manufacturing company. Sarah Chun, who had interned at Morrison and Associates the previous summer through family connections. David Rodriguez, who had graduated summa cum laude from Case Western Reserve University. They nodded politely at Maya, but she caught the sideways glances at her muddy blazer, the whispered conversations that stopped when she came near. One of them, she wasn't sure which, made a comment about diversity hires just loud enough for her to hear. Maya sat apart from the group, using the isolation to review her notes and center herself. She'd faced worse than this. She could handle a room full of people who had already decided she didn't belong. At 9:30 sharp, they were ushered into a conference room that screamed power and exclusion. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Cleveland. The massive table was surrounded by leather chairs, and presentation screens lined the walls. Maya took a seat at the far end of the table, hyper-aware of being the only black person in the room. The interview panel entered. Thomas Morrison himself, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit. Jennifer Wells, the director of human resources, whose smile seemed to freeze when her eyes landed on Maya, and Michael Chun, a senior partner who looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine, but whose last name suggested he might understand something about being different in spaces like this. As they introduced themselves and explained the process, Maya felt the weight of their skepticism. This wasn't just an interview. It was a trial, and she was guilty until proven innocent. "We'll start with individual presentations," Morrison announced. Each of you prepared a 5-minute presentation on how you would approach expanding a client's market reach. Let's begin with Brad. One by one, the candidates presented their ideas. Brad spoke confidently about leveraging family business connections and country club networks. Sarah outlined strategies based on her internship experience and her father's contacts in private equity. David presented detailed market analysis with sophisticated financial projections, name-dropping professors and research that Maya recognized but couldn't afford to access. The panel's responses were warm, encouraging, filled with follow-up questions that allowed the candidates to showcase their knowledge and connections. When Maya's turn came, she stood slowly, aware that all eyes were on her mud-stained blazer and waiting for her to fail. Jennifer Wells barely looked up from her notes. "Ms. Johnson, I see you had some transportation issues this morning." The question was loaded with implications. Poor time management, lack of professionalism, inability to present herself appropriately. Maya recognized it as a trap. "Actually, I arrived early," Maya said evenly. "On my way here, I stopped to help an elderly woman who had fallen on the sidewalk. Most people walked past her, but I couldn't." Wells raised an eyebrow. "How charitable. But in our business, punctuality and professional appearance are paramount. How do we know you'll prioritize client needs over community service?" The room was silent. Maya felt the familiar burn of being forced to defend her character and competence simultaneously. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his silence speaking volumes. "I'll let my presentation speak to my priorities and capabilities," Maya said, clicking to her first slide. She had prepared extensively, but seeing the polished presentations of her competitors and feeling the hostility in the room, she knew she had to be perfect. "My topic is authentic market expansion," she began, her voice steady despite the hostile environment. "We can have all the sophisticated strategies in the world, but if we don't genuinely understand and connect with the communities we're trying to reach, we'll fail." Her slide showed demographic data for Cleveland's diverse neighborhoods, data that she'd gathered through painstaking research because she couldn't afford the premium databases her competitors had access to. Many consulting firms focus on high-level market analysis, but they miss the human element. When I researched your potential client base, I didn't just look at income levels and purchasing power. I walked through neighborhoods, talked to small business owners, understood their challenges from the ground up. Michael Chun interrupted. "That's an interesting approach, but how do you scale personal relationships? Our clients need strategies that work across markets, not just in specific communities." Maya heard the subtext. Communities like yours, communities that don't matter to our real clients. She pressed on. "The fastest growing market segments in this region are exactly those specific communities you're referring to. Latino, Black, immigrant, working class, white. These aren't niche markets anymore. They're the mainstream." Her presentation outlined a community-based expansion strategy that involved partnering with local organizations, understanding cultural nuances, and building genuine relationships rather than just deploying marketing campaigns designed by people who had never set foot in the neighborhoods they were targeting. For example, if we're helping a retail client expand into East Cleveland, we can't just analyze foot traffic patterns. We need to understand that many residents don't have reliable transportation, that they value businesses that invest in the community, that word-of-mouth recommendations carry more weight than traditional advertising. Jennifer Wells looked skeptical. "That sounds more like social work than business consulting. Our clients expect ROI, not community development projects." Maya was ready for this challenge. "With respect, Ms. Wells, that's exactly the kind of thinking that leaves money on the table. Let me show you the numbers." She presented case study after case study of businesses that had failed in diverse markets because they assumed all consumers were identical, contrasted with companies that had succeeded by understanding community-specific needs and values. Businesses that invest in authentic community relationships don't just achieve better short-term returns. They build sustainable competitive advantages. Companies that extract value without creating it face boycotts, regulatory challenges, and reputation damage that can destroy decades of brand building. As she spoke, Maya drew on her own experiences growing up in the neighborhoods that many businesses were trying to penetrate, rather than truly serve. She talked about economic development that benefited entire communities, not just extracted profit from them. "I may not have the same connections or family business background as some of my fellow candidates," she concluded, looking directly at each panel member. "But I have something else, authentic understanding of the communities that represent the fastest growing market segments in this region. And I have the determination to help clients succeed while making a positive impact." The room was quiet after Maya finished. Jennifer Wells was the first to speak, her voice dripping with condescension. "That was interesting, but I have to ask, do you really think your background gives you special insight into business strategy? This isn't about community organizing. This is about profit maximization." The mask was off now. Maya felt the familiar sting of having her qualifications questioned not because of her ideas, but because of her identity. She also felt something else: anger, righteous and clarifying. "My background includes a 3.8 GPA in business administration, internships at 3 different companies, fluency in Spanish, and quantitative analysis skills that I'll match against anyone in this room," Maya said, her voice controlled but firm. "But you're right that my background gives me additional insight. Insight into markets that traditional consulting approaches consistently fail to understand or serve effectively." Michael Chun leaned forward, his expression more curious than hostile. Can you work with clients who might not share your community-focused values? Can you adapt your approach to different corporate cultures? Another loaded question. Can you code switch? Can you make white clients comfortable? Can you hide your blackness when it's inconvenient? Maya looked him in the eye. I can work with any client who wants to succeed. But I won't help clients implement strategies that are destined to fail just because those strategies make them feel comfortable with their biases. My job would be to help them see that ethical expansion isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Jennifer Wells shuffled her papers dismissively. I think we've heard enough. Maya, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. The dismissal was clear, but Thomas Morrison had remained quiet throughout the exchange. Now he spoke for the first time since the presentations began. Actually, I have a few more questions. Maya, tell me about your family. The request surprised everyone in the room. Sir? Your family? What do your parents do? How did they prepare you for this moment? Maya straightened, recognizing that this could be another trap, but also sensing something different in Morrison's tone. My mother works as a CNA at Cleveland Clinic, and also cleans offices at night. My father works for the Postal Service, and is finishing his bachelor's degree at night school. They've both worked multiple jobs to support our family and help me get through college. Morrison nodded slowly. And what did they teach you about success? That it's not just about what you achieve for yourself, Maya replied. It's about opening doors for others and never forgetting where you came from. They taught me that character matters more than credentials, and that hard work is its own form of dignity. They also taught me that I'd have to be twice as good to get half as far, and that some people would never see past my skin color, but that I should never let their limitations become my limitations. Jennifer Wells looked uncomfortable. Michael Chun was taking notes. Morrison continued to study Maya with an expression she couldn't read. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and Maya wondered if she had said too much, been too honest about race in a room where such honesty was clearly unwelcome. Then Morrison turned to address the entire room. 40 years ago, I walked into a bank for my first real job interview. I was wearing a borrowed suit that didn't fit quite right, and I had grease under my fingernails from working at my uncle's garage to pay for college. The other candidates looked like they belonged there. I felt like an imposter. The room was completely still. Jennifer Wells looked surprised by Morrison's personal revelation. The difference was, I was just poor. I wasn't facing the additional barriers that Maya faces every day. The bank president could have dismissed me based on appearances. Instead, he saw something else: hunger, determination, and a different perspective on what banking could be. He took a chance on a working-class kid who had big ideas about serving communities that traditional banks ignored. Morrison's eyes found Maya's. That bank president was right. I spent 5 years there, developing programs that brought financial services to underserved communities. Those programs were incredibly successful because they were built on authentic understanding, not assumptions. But I was still white, still male, still able to fit in once I cleaned up and learned the rules. He paused, and Maya felt the room's dynamic shifting. When I started Morrison and Associates, I promised myself I would always look for that hunger, that authenticity, that willingness to see opportunities where others see problems. But I failed in one crucial way. I kept hiring people who looked like me, who came from similar backgrounds, who faced similar challenges. Jennifer Wells was taking notes frantically, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Maya, you walked in here with mud on your clothes because you stopped to help someone who needed assistance. You could have rescheduled, cleaned up, played it safe. Instead, you chose to show up as you are and trust that your character and capabilities would speak louder than your appearance. That takes a kind of courage that most of us will never need to summon. Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. This industry has a diversity problem, and it's not just about fairness, it's about competence. We keep hiring the same types of people from the same schools with the same backgrounds, and then we wonder why our solutions sometimes miss the mark with increasingly diverse markets. He turned back to the room. Maya's presentation wasn't just about market expansion. It was about market inclusion. It was about sustainable growth that benefits everyone, not just shareholders. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need as we expand our client base and our impact. Jennifer Wells finally spoke. Thomas, are you suggesting we lower our standards? I'm suggesting we raise them, Morrison interrupted. Our current standards have given us a room full of people who think alike, look alike, and have similar blind spots. Maya represents something we desperately need: authentic perspective, community connection, and the analytical skills to back up her insights. He looked directly at Maya. But I want to be clear about what you'd be walking into. You'd be one of the few people of color in our firm. You'd work with clients who might initially question your credentials. You'd face challenges that your colleagues won't face, some of them sitting in this room. Are you prepared for that? Maya thought about her parents' sacrifices, about generations of black professionals who had walked through doors that were barely cracked open, about the responsibility she carried not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. Mr. Morrison, I've been preparing for that my entire life. I've already faced challenges that some people in this room can't imagine. But I've also learned that diversity isn't just about fairness. It's about better outcomes. Different perspectives lead to better solutions, stronger strategies, and more sustainable success. She stood up, finding her full power. I'm not asking you to lower your standards for me. I'm asking you to recognize that excluding people like me has been lowering your standards all along. I'll work harder than anyone else in this room, not because I have to prove I belong, but because I genuinely care about the impact we can make. Morrison smiled, the first real smile Maya had seen from him. Jennifer, cancel the other interviews we had scheduled for today. I think we've found our new junior consultant. Maya's first day at Morrison & Associates was a masterclass in navigating hostile territory. She arrived early, impeccably dressed in a new suit her family had pooled their money to buy. But she could feel the tension in the air before she even reached her small office. The same receptionist who had looked at her with skepticism now greeted her with forced politeness. Ms. Johnson, welcome to Morrison & Associates. Your orientation materials are on your desk. Maya's office was small but professional, with a view of the city and space for the photos she brought from home. Her family at her college graduation, her parents on their wedding day, Zoe and Marcus at their school awards ceremony. She had barely finished arranging her desk when Jennifer Wells appeared in her doorway. Maya, we need to talk. My office. Now. The HR director's office was intimidating by design. Diplomas from prestigious universities, awards from professional organizations, and a family photo showing her with a husband and children who all looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. I want to be clear about something. Wells began without preamble. Thomas may have made this decision, but you'll be working with me on a daily basis. I expect absolute professionalism, perfect work product, and no complaints about cultural differences or systemic barriers. If you can't handle the pressure, speak up now. Maya recognized the setup. Wells was establishing dominance, making it clear that despite Morrison's support, Maya would face resistance at every level. I understand the expectations, Ms. Wells. I'm here to do excellent work, and that's exactly what you'll get. But because everyone will be watching you. One mistake, one missed deadline, one client complaint, and I'll have documentation ready. Thomas may believe in social experiments, but this is a business, not a charity. The threat was clear. Maya was on probation not just professionally, but racially. She would be held to standards that her white colleagues would never face. Maya's first project involved helping a regional retail chain plan expansion into Cleveland's East Side neighborhoods. She was assigned to work with Brad Mitchell, the candidate from her interview who had questioned her qualifications and had been hired for a similar junior consultant position. Their first team meeting was an exercise in subtle sabotage. Brad consistently interrupted Maya's contributions, questioned her data sources, and suggested that her community-focused approach was idealistic and not scalable. "I think Maya's heart is in the right place," he said with a condescending smile. "But we need to focus on real business metrics, not social work." The senior consultant leading the project, a middle-aged white man named Rick Patterson, nodded approvingly at Brad's comments while barely acknowledging Maya's input. When Maya presented her preliminary research, conducted through evening and weekend visits to the target neighborhoods, Patterson dismissed it as anecdotal. "We need hard data, Maya. Market research from reputable firms, not stories from community meetings." Maya had anticipated this resistance. She had spent her own money to purchase limited access to the same premium databases that Brad could access through family connections. Her revised presentation included sophisticated statistical analysis alongside her community insights. "The quantitative data supports the qualitative observations," she explained, showing correlation between community investment strategies and long-term profitability. Businesses that build authentic relationships with local communities see 23% higher customer retention and 31% better word-of-mouth marketing effectiveness. Brad interrupted again. "Those statistics could be explained by other factors. I think we're overthinking this. The client wants market expansion, not community development." Patterson nodded. "Brad makes a good point. Let's focus on traditional expansion strategies that have worked in similar markets." Maya felt the familiar burn of having her expertise dismissed, but she pressed on. She knew her approach was sound, and she had the data to prove it. More importantly, she knew that if this project failed using traditional approaches, she would be blamed regardless of whose strategy they followed. The presentation to the retail client was Maya's first major test, and she could feel the skepticism in the room before she even spoke. The client's executive team, 5 white men in expensive suits, looked surprised when Morrison introduced her as one of the lead consultants. "I thought we were working with senior staff," the CEO said, barely glancing at Maya. "No offense, but this expansion represents a significant investment. We need experience guidance." Morrison smiled calmly. "Maya is one of our most talented analysts. I think you'll be impressed by her insights." The presentation began with Brad outlining the traditional expansion strategy. Location analysis based on foot traffic and demographic income levels, marketing campaigns designed by the company's existing advertising agency, and operational procedures adapted from their suburban stores. Then Maya presented her alternative approach. She had prepared for skepticism, but the hostility was immediate. "This sounds like political correctness rather than business strategy," the CEO interrupted. "We're not a non-profit. We're trying to make money." "With respect, sir, that's exactly why my approach will be more profitable," Maya replied, pulling up her financial projections. Community-centered expansion strategies show 40% higher success rates in diverse urban markets. The CFO, a man who had been checking his phone during Maya's presentation, looked up dismissively. "Where are you getting these numbers? What's your source?" Maya had anticipated this challenge too. She cited multiple academic studies, industry reports, and case studies from successful expansions. But she could see that the data didn't matter. They had already decided not to trust her. "Look, I'm sure you mean well," the CEO said with patronizing kindness. "But we need strategies that work in the real world, not in academic theory." The dismissal was complete. Maya felt the familiar sting of having her competence questioned, not because of her ideas, but because of their assumptions about her capabilities. But she had one more card to play. Gentlemen, what if I told you that Target's most successful urban expansions used exactly the community partnership model I'm recommending? Or that Walmart's highest performing stores in diverse markets are those that invested in local hiring and community relationships? She pulled up case studies from major retailers, showing concrete ROI data from community-focused strategies. The room grew quiet as she demonstrated how their competitors were already implementing similar approaches with remarkable success. The CEO looked uncomfortable. Those are different situations, different markets. Actually, sir, 3 of these case studies are from markets with nearly identical demographics to your target expansion areas. The community partnership model isn't idealistic. It's proven. The question is whether you want to learn from your competitors' successes or repeat your industry's common mistakes. By the end of her presentation, the room's energy had shifted. The client approved a pilot program using Maya's community-centered approach, but with significant skepticism and abbreviated timelines. We'll try this for 6 months, the CEO said. But if the numbers don't work out, we're switching to traditional methods. Maya threw herself into the pilot program with the intensity of someone who knew that failure wasn't just professional disappointment. It was confirmation of every stereotype about her capabilities. She worked 16-hour days, spent evenings and weekends in the target communities, and built relationships with local business owners, community leaders, and potential customers. The resistance within her own firm was constant. Rick Patterson questioned every expense, every timeline, every decision. Brad Mitchell undermined her work in team meetings, suggesting that she was in over her head and that the project needed more experienced leadership. Jennifer Wells documented every minor delay, every budget variance, every client question as evidence of Maya's inadequacy. When Maya requested modest additional resources to implement community partnership programs, Wells denied the request. We're not running a charity, Maya. This is a business. If you can't deliver results within budget, perhaps you're not ready for this level of responsibility. But Maya had allies too. Thomas Morrison checked in regularly, offering support and protection when the resistance became too overt. Michael Chun, the senior partner who had seemed intrigued by her interview presentation, began asking detailed questions about her community engagement strategies. This is fascinating work, Chun told her during one of their conversations. I've never seen such detailed community analysis. How did you learn to do this kind of research? I grew up in these communities, Maya replied. But I also studied anthropological research methods, community development theory, and market psychology. It's not enough to have personal experience. You need analytical frameworks to make it scalable. Chun nodded thoughtfully. We should be teaching this approach to all our consultants. Most of us wouldn't know how to build authentic community relationships if our careers depended on it. 6 months later, the results were undeniable. The retail chain's community-focused stores were outperforming projections by 35%. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest in the company's history. Local hiring programs had reduced turnover by 60%. Community partnership initiatives had generated positive media coverage worth millions in free advertising. Most importantly, the stores had become genuine community anchors. Places where neighbors met, where local events were hosted, where residents felt ownership and pride. The business success was built on authentic relationships rather than extractive marketing. The client's CEO called an emergency meeting to discuss expanding the program to other markets. I have to admit, I was skeptical, he said, looking directly at Maya. But these results are extraordinary. How quickly can we implement this approach in our other expansion markets? Maya felt a moment of vindication, but she also knew this was just the beginning. The key is authentic community engagement, which takes time and genuine commitment. We can't just copy and paste this model. Each community has its own dynamics and needs. Brad Mitchell, who had spent months undermining the project, now tried to take credit for its success. "This has been a real team effort," he said. "I think my traditional business framework provided the foundation that made Maya's community outreach possible." Maya bit back her response. She had learned to pick her battles, and this moment was about the work, not personal recognition. But Thomas Morrison wasn't having it. "Let's be clear about what happened here," he said firmly. "Maya developed and implemented a revolutionary approach that everyone else in this room, including me, was skeptical about. This success is hers, and we should acknowledge that." The success of the retail project catapulted Maya's reputation within the firm and the broader industry. Harvard Business Review published a case study on her community-centered expansion model. She was invited to speak at conferences about inclusive economic development. Other consulting firms began trying to poach her. But success also brought new challenges. Some colleagues who had tolerated her presence when she was struggling began to resent her achievements. Others questioned whether her success was due to diversity quotas rather than merit. Maya overheard conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. She received anonymous notes questioning whether she had really developed her innovative strategies or had borrowed them from more experienced consultants. One particularly cruel message suggested that her community connections were a form of insider trading that gave her unfair advantages. The psychological toll was enormous. Maya found herself second-guessing every success, wondering if colleagues were right to question her achievements. She worked even harder, determined to prove that her results couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The breakthrough came when Morrison called her into his office for what she feared might be bad news. "Maya, I want to make you a senior consultant," he said without preamble. "You've earned it through your work, your results, and your leadership. But I also want to offer you something else." "What's that, sir?" "I want you to lead our new community economic development practice. Build a team, develop training programs, establish this approach as a core competency for our firm." "What do you say?" Maya was stunned. This was beyond her wildest expectations. Not just career advancement, but the opportunity to fundamentally change how consulting was practiced. "I accept, Mr. Morrison, but I want to ask for something else too." "What's that?" "I want to start a comprehensive mentorship and recruitment program. Partner with HBCUs, community colleges, diverse professional organizations. Bring in talent that looks like America and thinks like America. This firm's success shouldn't depend on one person who happened to break through the barriers." Morrison leaned back in his chair, smiling. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that made me want to hire you." "Yes, absolutely. You have my full support." The mentorship program launched the following semester with 20 students from Howard University, Cleveland State, Oberlin College, and several community colleges. Maya worked with them on real client projects, teaching them not just technical skills but survival skills, how to navigate predominantly white